Greetings and welcome to the Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. I'm Phyllis Hollis, your host. As an extension of my Instagram page, Cerebral Women, this podcast offers insights into the visual art world. I interview artists, mainly artists of color and female artists who will freely articulate what inspires their creativity. In addition, you'll hear interesting perspectives from dedicated art professionals who work with artists and the art institutions that feature them. I'm confident that collectively, these individuals will indeed stimulate your mind as they do our eyes. Please know these interviews are conducted in my Manhattan apartment, so please forgive the background sounds of city life. Welcome to the Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. This episode features Oakland, California-based painter and social expressionist David Huffman. His paintings draw on aspects of his childhood during the Black Power movement in the 1960s and 70s. Growing up in Berkeley, he was steeped in the activism of the Black Panthers as his mother, Dolores Davis, marched with the group and designed a slinking panther logo and a free Huey flag for them in 1968. His work is in the collections of SFMOMA in San Francisco, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the Berkeley Art Museum, the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Minneapolis Institute of Art, the San Jose Museum of Art, the Eileen Norton Collection, and the Embassy of the United States of America, Dakar, Senegal, along with many others. David enjoyed a recent solo exhibition at the Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco and has been included in recent group exhibitions at the De Young Museum in San Francisco, Everson Museum of Art in New York, Weatherspoon Museum of Art in North Carolina, and the Wright Museum in Michigan. He is the recipient of numerous awards and residencies, including the Eureka Fellowship, Artadia San Francisco, Palo Alto Public Arts Commission, and the Barclay Simpson Award. He studied at the New York Studio School and received his MFA at California College of the Arts and Crafts. He is currently on the board of SFMOMA. Please visit cerebralwomen.com for his expanded bio and enjoy this episode featuring David Huffman. David, welcome to my Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. I am looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Let's start with, when did you discover your artistic passion, or when did you discover that you are indeed a visual artist?
Wow, that's a long journey. I think, when most artists start making art, they don't call it art. They just maybe are interested in things and use art material. I started off as a drawer mostly, and that kind of went into watercolor and just looking at the world, recreating characters. I've been making art since I was so young, like maybe 10 years old. And when it comes to knowing you're an artist, that didn't come until much later, until after I got into art school. I think when I was in New York for a little bit in the 80s, and I met a lot of interesting artists like Roy Lichtenstein. I was at John Basquiat and Warhol's opening at Tony Shafrazi. That was very exciting. And I was also kind of a colleague with Jason Rhodes, who became like an installation artist. So I think then is when the sense of there's a priority to create, to also look at other artists and kind of see like where I stood in relation to what they were doing. I think that's around that time. So we're talking like, late 80s, when I really felt like, being an artist was an intended effort.
Is there a particular body of work or an artist that really influenced you back then?
Back then, I think I was mostly into doing things that were a little bit more realistic in the beginning. I was looking at the whole Leonardo da Vinci kind of thing. And then I kind of went into like a Francis Bacon kind of thing. And then Jacob Lawrence was somebody I was really interested in, because there wasn't a lot of like Black artists to look at when I was in school in the 80s. They didn't really show anything. So I wasn't really aware of any contemporary Black artists. So when I was in New York and I met Basquiat and I saw his show, I was really impressed with him expressing, Black content publicly. And I'd never seen that. And to be honest with you, I was a little shy about it myself because, growing up in my house, you kind of kept all your things at home. You didn't tell the public much of anything that was personal. And I felt like he was talking about a lot of personal stuff. So I was both excited by that, but also I kind of like was a little, I don't know, hesitant. But I think back then art was still really pluralistic. I kind of looked at a lot of different things, whether it be sculpture, painting, some video, and a lot of photography. But there really wasn't like one artist that just kind of knocked me out. I felt like the game was, or the necessity was, to find your own voice. And that was super challenging because you had to go into a very deep place, a place where no one was really. And you kind of needed to find out, what made you tick. So it was a lot of introspection. I think eventually someone like Raymond Saunders was an artist that I found very compelling. He had this one painting called Bird. And I remember going into San Francisco Museum of Modern Art back then. And when I saw that painting, it just knocked me out. It froze me in my tracks. And I just felt this visceral connection to not only Black content, but this power of making a very contemporary statement in painting. It wasn't like an old fashioned kind of idea on romantic notions of Blackness, but it was more of a deeper, new digging into what an African American person, could do or was able to do. So it had a certain kind of permission as well for me to go deep myself.
How did your professors impact you?
I think the thing, when I was an undergrad, I kind of like transitioned from like thinking about more illustration style work into more free flow self-expression. That was a very interesting kind of bridge to cross from one to the other. So I had professors on both sides of that bridge. And when I started looking more into the self-expression thing, I had a really good professor. His name was Franklin Williams. And he really got people to think about who they were on the inside internally. And he didn't have a lot of artists of color in his class. I was like one of the only ones. So I got singled out quite a bit. But one thing I can say about him, he really was interested in who I was as a person of color and what that meant to me. And that helped me really focus more on that, on my own personal biography. So I didn't want to like take art in a way like I'm looking at this kind of European history and I'm going to make my version of it, but that I had a whole nother story that maybe it wasn't even told yet. So I think, he was definitely influential as an undergrad. And later on, as a grad student, I had Larry Sultan, who was a photographer, and he was really instrumental because I had done some work with these little blackface characters. I was trying to expand on that kind of visceral connection to them. And like they had this horrific grin and it was very demeaning and it was a stereotype of Blackness. And I wanted to dismantle that in some way. And I remember taking one of these figures, the blackface figures, and I shrunk it down and I put it in this like flying saucer. And I was just trying things out. And he had seen the painting and he really took to it in a very big way. And he helped me understand or reflect on what that seems to be about. And so he helped me, look at that as a really interesting direction to go with, because I had so many different things happening at that time, making different things. And that was just one of many. And so him having a focus on that or helping me focus on that really played a pivotal role in me like growing as an artist. It helped me find my intention to make these narratives to like go into a kind of psychological depth on Blackness in a way that I hadn't anticipated before.
Share with us, how do you define your practice?
I'm a painter of color, African American, and I'm free. I try to let myself be unencumbered, to not have any shackles. I grew up in a very politically activist family. My mom was an artist for the Black Panther Party and had designed a Panther logo. So I was around a lot of like political effort, a lot of fair-mindedness, a lot of protest, a lot of like understanding rights and wrongs. And so that helped me understand a lot of what to do to be a free person. And so as an artist, I like to say that, I'm definitely encumbered by racial regressions that the country, United States, is full of. But at the same time, I insist on my own personal freedom. So I really like being a painter, having the studio, and going into that studio and finding my voice and having very specific, research to work with ideas and to make a body of work around certain concepts. And I feel like that's something that, we haven't really always had the opportunity to do, way back in the past. So I define myself as a, artist of color, a painter.
Do you feel Black art can be defined?
It probably can by somebody. It depends on the perspective, that where a question like that could be a perspective, a political perspective of someone trying to communicate to a group of people about something in particular about Blackness, which I can totally understand. You might need a parameter in which to do that. But for me, being a human being, being a person of color, being Black, is that there's boundlessness with our innate sense of freedom too. So I think that's a tricky thing. It depends on anything. I think for myself, my priority in what I make has to do solely with Black life and Black culture. So there is that. And most artists that I see that are African American making art usually make art that has some quality of Blackness in it. So, but it's not unlike Picasso painting Spanish guitars or things that are related to Spanish culture because of him being Spanish, So in some ways, we're just being who we are. By default, it happens to be a Black life concern focus. But I don't really know how you would just define it other than that.
As an abstract painter, have people ever said to you what's Black about your art? There's no figures?
No one said that to me, but I could understand how somebody might ask that question to themselves. I think the kind of work that I make now is a little bit more subtle when it comes to Black identity or iconography. So when I'm using something like basketball hoop netting, I see it as a coded urban kind of vernacular that's related to Black life, and it's related to how I grew up. I grew up playing basketball in parks like all day and night. So there's this kind of urban definition of experience that I feel like holds a quality of Blackness in it. It doesn't have a descriptive arrow that says this is the definition, but for me, it has that, it carries that. So I amalgamate, a quality that I feel like is definitely related to the Black body, but it's not the anatomy so much, but it might be a coding of it in its like experience. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to make work that's coming from myself, but I always feel like no matter what kind of work I make, it has to have some ingredients of my own personal sense of who I am and my identity, and that is being an African American male.
Do you want your work to redefine the narrative of how Black people exist in our world today?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense of the activist nature of what I'm trying to do with what I call social abstraction. But for me, I'm taking on a challenge of Eurocentric perspective on abstraction and including Black life into that. So by doing that, I think I inadvertently create a voice for new Black identity. But really, the front line of it for me is basically trying to kick down the walls of Eurocentric aesthetics, which usually has more to do with white-minded perspectives and concerns and priorities. And for me to add somewhat of whether it be clear or not so clear, elements about Black body or the Blackness in some sense, I'm trying to expand the conversation historically on abstraction to include the Black body. But I feel like in some ways, as that area changes and increases and becomes more inclusive, that it innately gives Black people a bigger stage of who they are. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that's generally how I perceive it.
Are there concepts or thoughts that connect all your work?
I think what I've already said about the priorities being, who I am racially, and that's always part of my strategy in some sense, even though I feel like it needs to be unencumbered. Like it should still be a sense of freedom and expression. So if I were to take specific paintings, and there's this show I have up called Children of the Sun and Casey Kaplan right now, and one of the signature paintings is called Eucalyptus. And in that painting, I have lots of layers. In one layer, you can see a stamping. In another part of it, you see a photo of me and my brother with Bobby Seale from Black Panther Party. And then you see a netting pattern. You see all this stuff, these accoutrement of what I consider abstract, expressionistic, or contemporary painting signifiers. And at the same time, I feel like this is a torch for, like, what if abstraction included, more urban vernacular? Because I feel like in some ways, this history that we've been given up to a certain point, I think it's being dismantled. But it's always been a very comfortable position in some sense, even though artists did struggle to get to where they got. But they also had a safe ground in which to do this. And most of us had to do this on the fly, and while we're struggling to do it, Black people, I feel, have to have like two considerations. Like, one, we do our work, we do our art or whatever creative thing that we do, or something professional. But we also have to attend to like racial discrimination, whether it be in micro forms, aggression forms, or very, pronounced ways. That's a whole nother psychological kind of front to battle. So we have like these two forces that we're constantly dealing with.
When do you know work is finished?
It's tricky. For me, it's like making a song for an album. I struggle to get something comprehensive that speaks to me in a way that I haven't heard. I think I make paintings kind of like what a musician would do in the recording studio. I just keep adding things, and then there's a point where there's too much this in it, there's too much of that, and I overdo the painting, and then I have to stop, and hopefully I can get it back, and that's when I know it's pretty much done.
And the titles. When do the titles enter your creativity?
Titles are tricky because, like I said, if I were making an album, the album generally has a consciousness, a kind of singular point of view, and then all these songs kind of pivot around it. Like, I make work like that quite a bit. So if I have a certain perspective that's a general form, I think about titles in tandem with that. Sometimes titles come right after the work is already done, or I have to wait a few weeks after it's done. Or sometimes, like right in the middle of a painting, I can feel where it's already going. So the good thing is that it always happens, but sometimes some titles come very easy, and then some are very tricky. And then sometimes I come up with a title, it's like, that's a great title. And it's like, oh, I would love to use that again. So it's, you have so many titles used, you have to keep finding new relevant titles for your work. And that part gets a little challenging, but it's a very fun thing because in some sense, a title can unpack some of the content of the work too.
Do you listen to music while you're working?
Sometimes. Yeah, sometimes for sure. It all depends on how well the work is going. If the work has a certain kind of flowing condition that I feel like I can have the freedom to listen to music while doing it, sometimes I need total focus and silence with the work to listen very carefully about what it needs. And sometimes music can kind of like stop that, and I don't want that to happen. So I'd say music happens about 60% of the time.
How do you keep learning?
I think if you're living and breathing, you're kind of always learning, whether it's about something in particular, it's being focused on something is kind of that sense of intention keeps you on a road always. If you have intention, you have a focus, you're always going to learn something in relation to it because that's your lens of looking at stuff. So if I'm focused on anything in particular, there's all this new stuff that shows up, even if it's on the periphery, right? If it's on the sides, it'll all of a sudden become right in the center. And I feel like generally my learning curve comes from a general intention. Now, there's things that you can learn spontaneously all the time, organically, and I believe in that for sure. But if you're trying to increase your learning, or for myself, I need to know more, I'll have to stick with that. So I do this very singular kind of meditation on whatever that subject that I'm interested in, so that I can kind of like get as much information on it. So there's like two aspects. There's the knowing, to know what to look at, maybe something to read or study. And then there's like being open to things that will also be connected to the subject that just allows itself to show up on its own in a very intuitive way.
What materials do you use in your work?
I think a better question is what materials I don't use. I mean, I use acrylic, I use oil, I use drawing material, graphite, color pencils, spray paint. I use basketball hoop netting, the actual physical netting. I use glitter. I use wood panels, I use paper, I use canvas. Sometimes I do stuff on the wall. Yeah, I mean, I use quite a bit. So I will do silk screening at times. I'll make stamps, whether I do them myself or I do the drawing and have them digitally or laser cut made. I use quite a few materials.
And what's your process of choosing color?
Well, color has always been a very intentional thing for me. I kind of, like if I'm thinking about something in particular, it depends on the body of work. When I was doing these paintings that were my first, what I call basketball abstractions, where I would take a small image of the basketball and create these abstract paintings that look like particles, right? And the colors that they generally had were something that I might have indexed from some concern. So if I'm thinking like I did a collard green painting and I wanted only collard green color spectrum for that painting. So I'm looking at different types of collard greens and I'm making a list of the various colors that are required to make that painting. Or if I'm making a painting about the movie, The Planet of the Apes, I index colors from that movie, whatever the movie is, whether it's beneath or the regular first or second Planet of the Apes film, I will just like look for certain signifying colors to make that painting. So for me, that indexing is really important. And then sometimes I will look for contrasting sensations, which to me is a whole nother palette choosing kind of thing that has less to do with the concept of a narrative subject, but it has more to do with a kind of the physicality of the painting.
If you were not a visual artist, what other career path do you think you would have chosen?
That's a good question. I think generally real artists can't really do anything else unless we really, really had to. We'd probably survive us in some way. But in school, I was really into nuclear physics and astronomy. I really was like into that kind of thing, but not in a way that was super academic. Like I was just into reading sci-fi and reading scientific papers and journals and just like really into that kind of thing. And I don't know if I would have been able to handle the math on becoming like a nuclear physicist or anything like that. But I really was kind of passionate about some of those concepts, and some of the visuals that came out of, how the cyclotron was made and what it does with atoms and so on. It's just like it just seemed very interesting subject wise, but I'm not really sure what I would have done otherwise,
Is there anything that you're really excited about right now?
Yeah, I think, being an artist is a super exciting way to be, I think, for myself. My practice keeps me engaged. I have a window to kind of my own kind of perspective. I feel really privileged to have, I've worked really hard to get it. And it excites me to have that in general. So there's always like something that percolates in the sense of what I do creatively that keeps me engaged. But when it comes to like being excited about the art, for instance, like I have this idea, this kind of philosophy, and I call it the tyranny of my innate good taste. And basically what it is that I'm making work in the studio, and sometimes it's very exciting to see what I've done, and this new piece is really amazing to me, and I'm like, wow, and I'm moved by it to a point where it's like my heart is full or something's full. And 4 days later, the painting is not great. It didn't really hold up. And so I have to be very careful with my sense of excitement, because for me, I generally need time in order to understand whether that particular work sustains time, that it isn't just eye candy or window dressing or just a surface moment. And I think it's tricky because the art world right now is full of a lot of people who want to be known and they want their work to be loved. And so that sounding board can be really tricky, because then you start making work for that type of idea. And so the excitement is about how they are excited. And you have to be very careful, because that won't last forever, because everybody's sense of interest changes and it may change away from you. So my sense of excitement is kind of like just the path I'm on is exciting, And yeah, there's definitely projects that really make me feel hopeful, stuff that I have coming up that I'm kind of excited about, but I'm never really blown away. I mean, what I get blown away about is what I do in the studio, because it's like it's like alchemy, there's an incantation. It's like a supernatural kind of dwelling, My studio is a very sacred space, a lot of sweat and effort and prayer occurs there. So, I'm always involved in a kind of dharma. So for me, that's really where all the real power is. But yeah, sometimes I definitely get excited that a piece has finally resolved itself.
So I have to ask, based on what you just said, do you think about your audience when you're creating?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, I don't think about my audience when it comes to making a primary shift in my work. When it comes to like having a subject that really compels me to make work around that, I can't think about anybody. It's more about me and the universe, or me and my spiritual depth. When it comes to like a show or something like that, yeah, I'm kind of thinking about the audience, how it's going to be perceived, what's the best way to get people to understand a certain procedure I'm interested in subject-wise, And sometimes it's easy to get slipped into the collector concept too, like, oh, collectors will like something in particular, that's very dangerous. I try not to go in that direction because there's really not a lot of nourishment there artistically or creatively. Yeah, it's a hit and miss, but generally in the beginning when I was in grad school, I felt like my audience, or who I was trying to communicate with my work, were Black folks, because they understood the struggles that I'm thinking about, they're understanding some of the conditions that I'm trying to unearth in the work. So I feel like in some ways I'm trying to have a conversation with like, hey, look at this, look what we've done, look where we're going. So there's that kind of sense of connecting to an audience. But at the same time, I'm also trying to break down some barriers, racially, in the sense of being accepted as a human being making art as well. So it's kind of like the sense of audience, it varies depending on, what the priority is. But generally, artistically, I try to like tend to something without peopling it. Like it has to be about whatever the deep dive is. The deep dive generally doesn't have audience on it. But I feel like I am making work for a community of people, and I'm not making work just for myself. I like the idea of, it's like I said before, it's like making an album. You're not making that album for you to listen to. You're making it to be brought out into the world so other people can hear it. And I do make work like that. So there's a kind of reflection on that. And it may be that the audience is really big on one type of work and then very small on another. And I have to just accept whatever that is. But at the same time, it can be a good way to kind of like have a conversation.
Well, I certainly have enjoyed our conversation. This can be our last question. It's full-bodied, as the others have been. What do you feel is the purpose of art, and what is your role?
Oh, I think that's a great question. I used to not like questions like that because it really essentialized a whole bunch. But I feel like right now in the times we're in this kind of post-truth space where so much is being dismantled that used to really be stable, And I feel like art has always been this kind of like excessive luxury item culturally, because we've had this kind of mindset of this kind of blue collar concept of if you work really hard physically or in some way, that's real work, that's real effort and real contribution. And those things definitely are. But at the end of the day, if you're not in somewhat released into the spirit of who you are, and you only are in drudgery and in that sense of like making something logically valuable, then you kind of like need a place to be unencumbered. You need a place where your spirit is ignited. You need a sense of beauty. Like to me, beauty in art is not about pretty, and it's not about saccharine. It's actually about expanding the human condition. And I feel like art is that thing. And I think essentially art generally, and there's so much art out there that has its own priority. So there's a lot of people who don't care about that. But I think myself as a painter, I would like to enhance people's, sense of awe and wonder, and I think if more people were involved in their own sense of awe and wonder, they would have less time to be fiddling with other people's lives and causing mayhem, So I feel like awe and wonder, is a really great way that to see art, to experience art. So I feel like, it's just necessity for the soul, for the human condition.
Thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. For additional content, please visit cerebralwomen.com and be sure to follow Cerebral Women on Instagram.